Picture the moment in your mind. 43 people in a community room on a Saturday afternoon in October, folding chairs arranged in neat rows, a banner on the wall that reads, "Congratulations on someone else's 30 years of service," paper plates stacked by the buffet table, and me, 73 years old, wearing my cobalt blue church dress with the matching hat, walking through that door with a manila folder pressed against my chest like a shield. The room smelled like catered macaroni and cheap floral centerpieces. Raymond was standing at the front with his hand around a glass of punch, laughing at something one of his colleagues had said. And when he turned and saw me, the laugh died in his throat like something had been switched off. And I want you to remember that face. That specific face. The one that knows exactly what it has done, and is only now realizing that you know it too. That is the face I had been waiting 7 years to see. I'll come back to this moment, but first I need to take you back to where it started, because nothing makes sense without the beginning. I am looking out the window at the rain falling on the street, and for the first time in years, I feel like I can breathe. It is a summer afternoon on the quiet cul-de-sac where families have lived for generations, one of those Newark neighborhoods that the rest of the world forgot about in a way that turned out to be a blessing. The same faces on the same porches, the same children who grew up and brought their children back, the same corner store with the handwritten signs in the window. I am standing inside my apartment in subsidized housing, the long hallways with fluorescent lights stretching out behind me, and the rain outside is doing that soft, steady summer thing where it barely makes a sound on the pavement, just darkens it slowly. The heat makes everything slow down and the fan spins all day, and I let the slowness settle into my bones because I have been running, not physically, but inside. I have been running for years. I came straight from Sunday service, which is why I am still in my cobalt blue church dress with the matching hat. I needed God in my clothes when I sat down to write this out. There is something about putting on your best and walking into that sanctuary that prepares you for telling the truth afterward. The dress fits differently than it did last year. I have put back on the weight I lost when I was afraid all the time. That is worth noting. On the kitchen table sits a pan of macaroni and cheese baked golden on top, the smell of sharp cheddar and breadcrumbs filling every corner of this small apartment, and beside it, a stack of unpaid bills held together with a rubber band. $4,200 in debt that is not mine. That was never mine. But it landed in my lap the way everything else did, delivered without my consent, and then explained to me like it was my own fault for not understanding. In the corner, my small altar with candles and prayer cards flickers, though the windows are closed. I don't know how those candles always catch a draft when there isn't one. I stopped questioning it. In front of the altar, folded neatly, is my grandmother's handwritten recipe for sweet potato pie: vanilla, cinnamon, nutmeg, evaporated milk, and something she called patience, because you cannot rush honest things. I have been baking that pie for 50 years. It is the one thing in my life that has never lied to me. You put in what you put in, and it comes out exactly as it should. I wish I had understood that about people sooner. But I need to tell you about the coat first, because that is where most people's understanding of this story begins. And even though it is not where my pain begins, it is the image that made everything visible. It was -20 degrees Celsius. I mean to say that specifically, because I want you to feel what that temperature does to a body, what it requires in terms of protection. February 14th, 2019. Valentine's Day, which I note only because Raymond had not acknowledged the date in several years, and I had stopped expecting him to. His secretary, Desiree, was standing in the foyer of our building. She had arrived without calling ahead, in a thin wool jacket, and she was shivering. And Raymond looked at me, looked directly at me, and said, "Give her your coat, Lorraine. She needs it more than you do right now." I want you to sit with that sentence for just a moment. He said that, in my own home, to me. And I gave her the coat. a full-length mink I had saved for 11 years. $6,800 of my own money. The only true luxury I had ever bought myself in my entire adult life. I unzipped it and I handed it across the threshold, and Desiree took it without meeting my eyes, and Raymond watched her go with something in his expression that I could not name yet, but would come to understand completely. The door closed. The cold came in through the gaps, and I stood there in my own hallway in a cotton blouse and told myself this was the price of being a good Christian woman. That is the belief I had internalized so deeply I could not see it as a lie. But the coat was only the symbol. The real story was quieter and far more patient than a February evening in the foyer. And somewhere in the kitchen, that stack of bills held together with a rubber band was already waiting, though I did not know it yet. The first crack in the mask had been there for years. I had simply been trained not to look at it. If someone you love is telling you that you remember things wrong, that you are overreacting, that you do not understand finances, that you are too emotional to be trusted with your own life, I need you to keep listening. Because what I am about to tell you took me 7 years to understand and about 6 weeks to prove. There is a specific kind of loneliness that comes not from being alone, but from being surrounded by someone who has decided that your reality is inconvenient. I know you understand what I mean. I can feel it even through this screen, through these words. Some of you are nodding right now because you know exactly the sensation I am describing. It lives in the chest, just below the sternum. It is the loneliness of being in the same room as someone who is systematically dismantling your ability to trust yourself. Raymond and I had been married for 19 years when the coat incident happened. 19 years is a long time. Long enough to build something real. Long enough to build something that only looks real from the outside while the foundation has been quietly removed from beneath you. In the early years, the good years, Sunday mornings smelled like this apartment does now. Butter and sweet potato and cinnamon from my grandmother's recipe, the kind of smell that expands to fill every corner of a home. I used to bake pie on Sunday mornings before church, standing at that counter in my robe, and Raymond would come up behind me and put his arms around my waist and say, "Nobody does this like you, Lorraine." I believed him. I believed all of it. We would sit down to a dinner of baked macaroni and cheese, the golden top kind, the kind that takes time and is worth it. And we would talk about the week, the neighborhood, the families on the cul-de-sac, the children we had watched grow up and move away. It felt full. It felt like the life I had prayed for. At my small altar in the corner, the candles burned steadily and the prayer cards were fresh, and I understood my faith as something that asked me to be patient, to be forgiving, to believe the best of the people I loved. He used that against me. I want to be very clear about that. He used my faith against me. The first time he told me I was misremembering something, it was small. A dinner reservation I was certain we had made. He said we had never discussed it. I went back through my mind 3, 4, 5 times, and I was sure, I had been sure, but he was so calm, so unbothered, and I was the one who seemed agitated, and I thought, maybe I am. Maybe I am making things bigger than they are. That is what resignation feels like in its earliest form. It does not announce itself as surrender. It announces itself as humility. Over months, then years, the things I was certain of became uncertain. The money I thought we had in savings, the conversation I remembered having about the furnace repair, the phone call I was positive had happened. Each time I brought up a discrepancy, Raymond had the same expression, patient, slightly tired, slightly concerned. And he would say, "Lorraine, honey, I'm worried about you. You've been forgetting things." And I would feel the cold wash of shame, and I would retreat, and he would continue. I stopped baking sweet potato pie for about 2 years. That is the detail that tells me the most about what he took from me. Because that recipe is not just food. It is my grandmother's hands in mine. It is 50 years of Sunday mornings, It is the one thing I have always known how to do with absolute certainty. When I stopped trusting my own memory, I stopped trusting my own kitchen. I would start the recipe and halfway through think, did I already add the vanilla? Did I already measure the sugar? I would throw it out and not start again. I lost my hobby. I lost my baking. And because he had also very gradually made it uncomfortable for me to spend time with my neighbors and my church community, always something he needed when I was about to leave, always a reason it was not convenient, I lost those too. Sister Dolores would call and I would answer quietly, aware of Raymond in the next room, and I would say I was fine, I was just busy, I would see her Sunday. He never told me I could not speak to her. He did not have to. He had arranged the atmosphere so that contact with anyone outside our apartment felt like a small act of transgression. What I sacrificed was my autonomy so completely that I stopped recognizing the loss. I did not sign my own name to anything for 4 years. He had made himself the center of every financial decision, every social plan, every daily movement. When I needed groceries, I asked. When I needed a doctor's appointment, I mentioned it and waited. I had a checking account I believed was nearly empty because Raymond had told me we were barely getting by. And I believed him, and I limited myself to $30 a week for personal spending, and I wore the same 6 outfits on rotation for 3 years, and I told myself this was responsibility. I told myself I was being a good steward. He also told me I was too old to understand the finances. He said it gently, almost kindly, the way you would say something to protect a person from embarrassment. Let me handle this, Lorraine. You don't need to worry yourself with the details. I am 73 years old, and I have been managing my own money since I was 16, and I let a man tell me I was too old to understand my own accounts. I know what some of you are thinking right now. You are thinking, why did you stay? Why did you not leave? And I need you to understand something about the way resignation works. It does not feel like a choice. It feels like gravity. It feels like the natural law of the situation you are in. I was 66 when I first thought clearly about leaving, and I sat with that thought for about 45 seconds before my own mind buried it under. Where would you go at 66? What would you do? You do not start over at 66. You endure. And that is exactly what Raymond had spent years teaching me to believe, that my options were zero. That my value outside of this marriage was zero, that the world had already moved on without me, and the best I could do was manage what I had. The bills and the rubber band would eventually prove all of it wrong. But in those years, under those fluorescent lights, with the fan spinning against the summer heat, I was still a woman who flinched before she spoke. And somewhere in Raymond's briefcase, a truth was waiting that even he had forgotten to guard. Wednesday evening, March of last year, 11:18 p.m. I know the exact time because I looked at my phone immediately after, the way you do when something happens that you already know is going to define the rest of your life. Raymond was asleep. He had been asleep since 9:30, which was becoming more common, and I had been sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water and one of my prayer cards, not quite praying, just holding the paper and letting the candlelight from my altar do what it does, which is flicker in a way that makes you feel less alone in a room. I needed a pen. I was going to write down a phone number I had been trying to remember before I lost it again. His briefcase was on the chair by the door, and he had left it unzipped. I was not snooping. I want to be clear about that, not because I owe anyone that clarity, but because I spent so many years being told my instincts were wrong that I need to be precise about the difference between intuition and intrusion. I was looking for a pen. What I found instead were bank statements. A joint account I did not know existed, opened in both our names. My name, my social security number, my signature, which I did not remember providing. $43,000 moved across 18 months in transfers I did not recognize to accounts I did not know. Receipts from a restaurant I had never been to. A lease agreement for an apartment in East Orange. co-signed by Raymond, Desiree's name on the top line. The same month he told me we could not afford to fix the heat, he had transferred $7,200 into that account. I want you to think about what it feels like to stand in a quiet apartment at 11:18 at night, holding paper that proves the life you have been living was a construction someone else built and assigned to you. The kitchen was completely silent except for the fan. The macaroni and cheese pan was on the counter, covered with foil from dinner. The candles on my altar were burning down to nothing. And I held those statements, and I read every line twice, and then a third time, because my body needed more time to process what my eyes had already understood. Then I walked to the bathroom. That is what I think of now as the mirror, the collapse. I stood under that fluorescent light, the buzzing kind that has never been kind to anyone, and I looked at myself for a long time. I was thin in a way I had not noticed. Not ill-thin, but absence-thin, like a woman who had been slowly edited down to her minimum. My eyes had the look of someone waiting for something to land on them, someone who had been in a state of low-level alert for so long that alertness had become her baseline expression. My collar was loose around my neck. My hands, when I raised them to the mirror, were shaking with a tremor I had not felt before. I had become someone who flinched before she spoke. I did not know her. I want to tell you that I cried. I think you might need me to have cried. But what I actually felt in that bathroom, under that fluorescent light, was something colder and more focused than grief. It was the feeling of a woman who has finally found solid ground after years of being told the floor is not there. I was not falling apart. I was arriving. I went back to the briefcase. I took photographs of every document with my phone, page by page, as quietly as I could in the dark hallway. My hands were still shaking, but I was steady in a different way, the inside kind of steady that has nothing to do with the body. I put everything back exactly as I found it. I zipped the briefcase. I went to bed. And I did not say a word. The stack of unpaid bills with the rubber band suddenly made a different kind of sense. $4,200 in charges on accounts in my name that I had not opened, for services I had not used. He had not just been moving money out of accounts I knew about. He had been building a financial architecture using my identity as the foundation. And he had done it so quietly, over so many years, that I had not felt the construction happening. The key object, that rubber band around those bills, had been sitting on my kitchen table for months like an accusation I did not have the context to understand. I had looked at those bills with shame, my shame, as though the debt were evidence of my own failures. Now I looked at them and felt something else entirely. I felt the beginnings of evidence. The full scope of what had been done was not something I could calculate alone. Not at 11:18 on a Wednesday night in a quiet apartment with a man asleep in the next room. But I had enough to know that what I had believed about my own life was not true, and that the woman in the mirror, the thin one with the waiting eyes, deserved to know everything. What happens to a woman when she finally has proof? She stops crying and she starts working. The day after I found the documents, I went to Sunday service, and I sat in my usual pew, and I sang every word of every hymn with the kind of deliberateness that is really a form of prayer. Not the asking kind, but the claiming kind. I am still here. I have not been destroyed. I know now. And after service, when most of the congregation had drifted out to the parking lot and the deacons were folding up the programs, Sister Dolores sat down next to me. Sister Dolores had been watching me shrink for years. I know that now. She told me afterward that she had been praying about how to approach me, that she had asked 3 different people in the congregation whether she should say something, and all 3 of them had said the same thing: wait until she's ready. The thing about genuine community is that the people in it see you more clearly than you see yourself. They hold the image of who you were before the damage happened, and they wait for the woman in that image to surface again. She put her hand over mine on the pew and she said, "Lorraine, I need you to let me help you." That was all she said, and I turned and looked at her and I told her everything. Not the way I had been telling myself the story, with his explanations already woven in, his justifications already present, his version of my memory already installed. I told her the bare facts. The account I did not know about, the $43,000, the lease with Desiree's name, the bills in the rubber band, the fur coat in February, the years of being told I did not understand finances, the years of asking permission for groceries. She did not look surprised. She looked like a woman hearing a confirmation of something she had already suspected. And in some ways that was the hardest part. Knowing that the truth of my situation had been visible from the outside while I was the one inside who could not see it. The next morning, she made a phone call on my behalf to a financial advisor named Mr. Clarence Webb, a retired CPA who ran a small pro bono consulting practice out of his home on Thursday afternoons for people in exactly this kind of situation. He agreed to see me that week for free. I arrived with my phone, the photographs I had taken, and the stack of bills from the rubber band, and I sat across from him at a folding table in his dining room while he put on his glasses and began reading. He read for 20 minutes without speaking. Then he looked up and said, "Mrs. Lorraine, what you have here is a documented pattern of financial exploitation. This is not small. This is not an accident. And this is not over. But it can be." He connected me to a private investigator named Davis who worked with elder financial abuse cases, and a forensic accountant named Patterson who specialized in tracing informal transfers. I paid them a retainer that Sister Dolores helped me piece together from 3 different sources: a small withdrawal I made carefully, a contribution from the church emergency fund, and a loan of $300 from another neighbor on the cul-de-sac who had been watching Raymond's pattern for longer than I had. These are the women you cannot buy with money, because what they give you comes from somewhere money cannot reach. Over the next 6 weeks, Davis and Patterson built a record. Every transfer, every date, every account. The full scope of what Raymond had moved and where he had moved it came into focus line by line. And what emerged was not a story of impulsive greed, but of calculated patience. A man who had spent years studying my resignation and using it as a withdrawal method. He had known correctly that I would not look. He had known correctly that I believed myself too old to understand. He had architected an entire financial structure on the foundation of my belief that I had no power. He was wrong about the foundation. He just did not know it yet. Something shifted in me during those 6 weeks that I want to try to describe accurately, because I think it matters. The sadness did not go away. The grief of 19 years of marriage, the grief of the person I had been before the gaslighting took hold, the grief of the pie I had stopped baking and the phone calls I had cut short and the Sunday mornings I had shrunk myself through. That grief did not disappear when I found the documents or when I sat across from Mr. Webb's folding table. Grief does not work on an efficiency schedule, but alongside it, cold and clear and completely new, was something else. Strategy. The particular clarity that comes to a woman when she stops asking why this happened and starts deciding what happens next. I want you to feel that shift with me, because I think some of you are standing at exactly this edge right now. The documents are on the table. Someone finally sees what you see. And the question is not whether you have been wronged. You know you have. The question is what you are going to do with that knowledge. I was going to do quite a bit. If you have never had to pretend for weeks at a time that you do not know what you know, that the person sitting across from you at dinner is not the same person whose crimes are sitting in a folder in your neighbor's apartment 3 doors down, then I am not sure I can fully explain what it requires. It requires a particular kind of stillness, not the stillness of surrender, which I had perfected over 7 years, a different kind. The stillness of a woman who has a plan. I made macaroni and cheese on Sunday evenings as I always had. I kept the altar candles fresh. I watched the fan spin in the summer heat, and I said the right things at the right times. And I watched Raymond move through our apartment with the comfortable ease of a man who believes he has successfully managed every variable. He had no idea that I was a variable that had changed. The close call came on a Tuesday evening in late August, about 3 weeks into my private investigation arrangement. I had made the mistake of leaving my phone face up on the kitchen counter while I was in the bathroom, and when I came back, Raymond was standing over it. Not holding it, just standing near it, looking down at the screen. The screen was dark by then. I had no way of knowing if he had touched it. I walked into that kitchen with every muscle in my body tensed to invisible, the way a woman learns to move in a house where she has been monitored. I picked up the phone as naturally as I knew how, and I said, "I was waiting for a call from Dolores about the church rummage sale." He looked at me for a moment with that particular look I had learned to fear, the evaluating look, the one that preceded a correction. And then he said, "You should keep that thing charged. You miss calls when it dies." And he turned back to the television. I stood at the kitchen counter for 3 seconds with my back to him before I trusted my face to be neutral again. That same evening, I called Sister Dolores and I told her we needed to move faster. She agreed. And the next morning, before Raymond was awake, I sat at the kitchen table in the early light with my prayer cards, and I said it out loud for the first time. Not in my head. Out loud, to the empty room, in a voice I had not used in years. No. Just that. One word. I want to explain to you what it felt like when I said it, because the liberation symbol in my story is not a dramatic scene. It is not a slammed door or a thrown object or a grand declaration in a public space. It is a 73-year-old woman sitting at a kitchen table in the pre-dawn quiet of a Newark summer with a fan spinning and candles lit and prayer cards spread out, saying no out loud in a voice that means it. Something in my chest unlocked, physically, like a mechanism releasing. And I sat there for a minute, just breathing into that space that had opened up. 7 years of permission asking, of minimizing, of believing I was too old and too tired and too close to the end to begin again, and a single word spoken aloud in my own kitchen dismantled more of it than I expected. I said it again. No. And then, I will not accept this. I have never accepted this. I was just waiting for the proof. Sister Dolores had, by then, located the senior community I had been dreaming about without quite letting myself dream. A place with a garden and a common room, activities, new people. A life that fit around my actual needs instead of someone else's convenience. She brought me the brochure on a Thursday, and we sat on her porch in the heat drinking sweet tea, and she pointed to the kitchen facilities in the common area and said, "You could teach pie baking there." And I felt something warm and specific move through me that I recognized, eventually, as hope. Davis and Patterson had completed their preliminary report. The full accounting showed patterns of financial exploitation totaling between the misused joint accounts, the debt placed in my name, and the redirected income, something in the range of $60,000 over 5 years. Not all of it was recoverable. Raymond had structured the transfers carefully enough that the legal path for recovery was uncertain, and I had already been told by legal aid that pursuing full restitution would be a long and expensive road. What mattered for now was the documented record, the proof, the truth with dates on it. I chose not to go to the police immediately. That was my decision, made with full information. What I wanted first was not his arrest. What I wanted was for the people who had watched Raymond perform the role of respectable, responsible husband in his professional community to see what I saw. I wanted the mask removed in a room full of people who had been fooled by it. I am 73 years old, and I understand something about the particular effectiveness of the well-timed truth. Raymond had mentioned in early September that his colleague Robert was retiring and that there would be a dinner in the building's community room on a Saturday in October. He had been planning to attend with his department. 43 colleagues, a room full of the professional life he had used as camouflage. I began to understand why the recipe said patience. You should understand the image of Raymond arriving to that retirement dinner, because it tells you everything about who he believed himself to be in October of last year. He had leased a Lexus LS in champagne gold. Not bought, leased, because Raymond had always understood the performance of wealth better than the accumulation of it. He pulled that car into the building parking lot on a Saturday afternoon in October, as though arriving somewhere he owned, and I watched from the window of our apartment while he straightened his jacket in the side mirror and tucked his phone into his breast pocket and walked toward the community room with the particular stride of a man who has never once doubted his own welcome. I had been watching that car for 2 years. It represented, to me, every dollar he had moved out of our life and into his performance, every bill in the rubber band, every repair we could not afford, every luxury I had declined while he financed his own comfort with my resignation as the collateral. That champagne gold color, which is a color that announces itself, was the color of everything he had decided was more important than me. I let him get inside first. I gave him 20 minutes. Patterson had prepared a second copy of the summary document, clean, organized, clearly labeled, with the account numbers and dates and transfer totals arranged so that anyone with basic literacy could understand what they were looking at in 30 seconds. Davis had advised me on what to bring and what to leave at home. Sister Dolores had offered to come with me, and I had asked her to stay by her phone instead. This was mine to do. I had already filed the initial paperwork with legal aid the week before. The divorce process had been formally initiated. That was the fight execution, not a confrontation at a kitchen table, not a screaming match, but the quiet, methodical work of placing legal documents into the hands of people whose job was to take them seriously. The accounts had been reviewed. The forensic report had been delivered to the attorney. Every transfer Raymond had made in my name without my knowledge was now part of a legal record. The structure of what he had built, so carefully, for so many years, was already being taken apart. He just did not know it yet. I want to explain to you the psychological component of what I was doing, because the revenge here is not dramatic in the way movies teach us to expect it. It is administrative. And that administrative precision was, for a man who had counted on my confusion and my resignation and my belief in my own powerlessness, the most devastating possible weapon. He had told me for years that I did not understand finances. I had proven, through 6 weeks of careful work with professionals who took me seriously, that I understood them well enough to document his crimes to a forensic standard. That folder in my hand, walking from the elevator toward the community room, was not a prop. It was a fact. The community room had been decorated with balloons and a catered spread. Folding chairs in rows, paper tablecloths in blue and white, a birthday store banner that said, "Congratulations." I could hear the voices before I opened the door, the particular sound of professional people at a social event, the laughter slightly louder than natural, the conversations covering the full range of small and meaningless things. 43 colleagues of Raymond's, people who had seen him at work, at other events, perhaps at other dinners where he had spoken about his wife with the gentle patience of a man managing a delicate situation. They were going to see something different today. I checked the folder one last time in the hallway, every page in order, every amount clearly visible. I smoothed the front of my cobalt blue church dress, not the one from that Sunday in summer, but the same dress, my best dress, the one I wore when I needed to be exactly who I was and nothing less. And I adjusted the matching hat and I put my hand on the door handle. The trap had been set for years, whether I knew it or not. The moment I found his briefcase unlocked at 11:18 on a Wednesday night had started this. Every photograph I had taken on my phone, every Thursday afternoon with Mr. Webb, every conversation with Davis and Patterson, every morning I had said the word no out loud in an empty kitchen. It had all been building toward this door, this handle, this afternoon. And the thing I want you to understand before I turn that handle is this. I was not angry when I walked in. Anger is a fire, and fires are hard to control. What I was certain. And certainty, in a woman who has been told for years that she cannot trust her own perception, is the most dangerous thing in any room. I opened the door. Raymond was at the front of the room. He was mid-sentence. hand raised to make a point, the kind of casual authority that comes from years of having people defer to you in professional settings. The room was full, 43 colleagues arranged across folding chairs and along the buffet table, some standing, some seated, drinks in hand. The guest of honor, Robert, was at a table near the front with his wife, both of them looking slightly overwhelmed by the attention in the way genuinely good people tend to. Raymond turned when the room shifted. The room shifted because rooms do that when someone unexpected enters. A small gravitational change, attention drawn to the door without anyone knowing why. He turned and he saw me, and his face performed that sequence I had been watching for years in reverse. The automatic social smile, then the pause, then the erasure, then nothing. Just still. I had seen that face perform every version of itself over 19 years, and I want you to know that the stillness, the absolute absence, was the most honest expression he had ever shown me. I walked to the table nearest to him. I opened the folder. I placed a copy of the summary document face up in front of him on the table, in full view of the 5 colleagues seated nearby. I said, "Everything in here is documented, every transfer, every signature, every lie with a date on it." The room had not stopped entirely. There was still the background noise of people at the far end who had not noticed yet. But the immediate area had gone quiet in the specific way of people who suddenly understand they are witnessing something real. Raymond's hand moved toward the document and then stopped. He said in a low voice I recognized as the management voice, the one designed to make me feel like a problem being handled. "Lorraine, this is not the place." And I said, "You told me I was too old to understand finances. Turns out I was just too trusting to believe you would steal from me." I want you to feel the temperature of that sentence in that room, because the people nearest to us understood immediately what they were hearing. Steal. The word that makes the air change. A woman in a cobalt blue dress with a matching hat, 73 years old, standing in front of 43 of her husband's colleagues with a documented forensic summary, using the correct word. Raymond's color changed. I had not seen him lose color before. He had always been the one who maintained composure while I was the one managed into uncertainty. And watching his composure dissolve was not satisfying the way I had imagined it might be. It was simply information. Confirmation that what I had always known about what happened in our apartment was real. "You told me I was confused. You were the only one confused." He tried. I want to give him credit for trying, because what he attempted next showed a kind of desperate professionalism. He lowered his voice further. He turned slightly away from the nearby colleagues. He said, "There are documents to review, Lorraine, and I think the 2 of us should sit down with an attorney and go through this properly. This is not—" And I said, "I didn't lose my mind, Raymond. I just finally found my records." You could hear it land, not with laughter or applause. This was not a movie. But with the particular quality of silence that happens when 43 people simultaneously realize that the man they have been seeing in a professional context for years has a wife standing in front of them with receipts, and the man cannot answer her. Some of them looked at the table. Some of them looked at me. 2 women near the back exchanged a glance I understood without being able to see it clearly. Desiree was there. I had not been certain she would be, but I had thought it likely, and she was, standing near the window in a charcoal jacket, holding a plastic cup, and she watched this entire exchange without moving. She did not speak. She did not make eye contact with Raymond. She looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. Not remorse, not quite. Something more like recognition. I did not address her. She had been a participant, but she was not the architect. Raymond had built this. Raymond had decided, in my foyer on a Valentine's Day in -20 degrees, that I could be handed over and discarded like a coat. He was still talking, low and controlled, the same voice that had been managing me for years. "Lorraine, please, you're embarrassing yourself." And I heard it for the first time as what it was: a technique, not a response to reality. A technique to reposition me as the unstable one, the emotional one, the woman who does not understand. After 7 years of it working, he was deploying it in a room full of witnesses who now had a summary document on the table in front of them. It did not work. "I am not embarrassed," I said. "I am 73 years old, and I have been invisible in my own life for 7 years. I am very visible right now, and I intend to stay that way." I closed my folder. I looked at him for a long moment. This man I had cooked for, prayed beside, saved money for, and endured, this man who had counted on my resignation and my age, and my faith and my love to protect him from consequences. I looked at him with the complete absence of anything he could use. Not anger, not grief, not need, just a woman who had said no and meant it and was done. Then I turned and walked out. The door closed behind me. The hallway was fluorescent and quiet. The elevator took its time arriving. I stood in front of it with my folder under my arm and my hat still perfectly level, and I took the longest, deepest breath of the previous 7 years, and I let it out slowly. He had stolen from me. He had erased me. He had taken a coat off my back in February cold and watched a woman walk away with it and smiled. And I had just stood in front of his entire professional life and named everything he had done in a voice that did not shake, and he had not been able to stop me. Not because I am extraordinary, because I had finally chosen to speak. The weeks after the retirement dinner were not quiet, but they were different from the noise I had lived inside for 7 years. Raymond called 17 times in the first 3 days. I answered twice. Once to confirm that I had retained legal counsel and that all further communication should go through my attorney. And once, about a week later, when he had reached a level of agitation in his messages that I wanted to hear in real time so I could understand what I was still dealing with. He explained himself on that second call for 9 minutes. He told me I had misunderstood the accounts. He told me the forensic report was based on incomplete information. He told me he had been planning to tell me about the joint account. He told me Desiree was just a friend. He told me I had humiliated him in front of his colleagues and that this was not who I was. This was not the Lorraine he knew. And I listened to all 9 minutes. Not because I needed to hear it. Because I wanted to know, finally and completely, whether any part of what he said could produce in me the old familiar response. The contraction, the doubt, the reaching for his version of my memory. Whether anything in his voice still had the power to make me small. It did not. Not one word. I listened the way you listen to a description of something that happened to someone else, with understanding, but without urgency, without the old helplessness. When he finished, I said, "The attorney will be in touch." And I ended the call. And I sat in the quiet of my apartment for a while after, and I understood that the silence was mine, that it had always been mine. I had just been lent out of it for too long. The justice in my story is internal. I want to be direct about that. Raymond kept the money, or most of it. The forensic accountant's report was thorough, but the legal path to financial recovery was long and expensive, and I made the decision, with full information and without bitterness, to pursue the divorce and the forward movement, rather than a prolonged court battle over funds that had likely already been dispersed. He lost his reputation in that community room in October. He lost the professional respect of 43 colleagues, which may seem like a small consequence against $60,000, and you would have every right to feel that way. But I need you to understand something about what I gained in exchange for letting go of that fight. I gained my own life back. And my life, at 73, is not a small thing. It is the only thing. The stack of bills held together with the rubber band sat on my kitchen table until the week I moved out. I looked at it differently every week. In March, when I found the documents, it had been shame and confusion. In August, when I said no out loud for the first time, It had been evidence and fuel. By the time I packed up that apartment, I looked at that stack of bills, $4,200 in debt that was never mine, and I felt something I can only describe as done. The rubber band had dried out and cracked. I threw the whole stack in the trash the day the movers came. Sister Dolores helped me pack. She brought 2 other women from the congregation, and they arrived on a Saturday morning in November with boxes and tape and a pan of sweet potato pie, made from my grandmother's recipe, which she had asked me to write out by hand, which I had done gladly. She put it on the counter and said, "You are allowed to be celebrated." And we ate pie in the half-empty apartment while the movers carried out boxes, and the candles on my small altar burned for the last time in that corner, and I took the altar with me, the candles, the prayer cards, every one of them, because that faith belongs to me and it goes where I go. The senior community is called Meadowbrook Gardens. It is in the northern part of Newark, 20 minutes from the cul-de-sac where I have spent the last 19 years, close enough to stay in relationship with the neighborhood I love, and far enough to be fully elsewhere. It has a common room with kitchen facilities and a garden that runs along the east side of the building where the morning light is good. I moved in on a Wednesday in late November, in weather that had turned crisp and clean, and I stood at the window of my new apartment. Real windows, wide ones, not the narrow slot I had been looking through for years. And I looked out at the garden below, and I felt the specific quality of being in the right place. I have been teaching sweet potato pie on the second Saturday of every month. 6 women so far, ranging in age from 68 to 81, and we spend 3 hours in the common room kitchen with sweet potatoes and evaporated milk and my grandmother's handwritten recipe, and afterward we eat and we talk. Not about what happened to any of us necessarily. Though some of that finds its way in inevitably, because that is what happens when women of a certain age sit down together with food and time, about what is next, about what they want, about what their grandmothers taught them and what they are teaching now. Mr. Webb comes by every 6 weeks to review my accounts. I opened my own at the credit union 3 blocks from Meadowbrook, $200 to start, and it has grown since then in ways I will not put numbers to yet, because I am still learning to let good things be real without bracing for them to be taken. Legal aid has been thorough. The divorce process is moving as these things move, slowly and then suddenly. The attorney tells me I will be financially protected. I believe her. And the accounts? The real ones. The ones that are mine alone with my signature and no one else's. I check them every Sunday morning after church, before I start the pie. Because the numbers do not lie, and neither does the woman who finally stopped allowing anyone else to read them to her. It is February now. I want you to notice that I started this story in the summer heat, with the fans spinning and the rain on the street and everything slow and golden, and it is February now, which is the same month this whole thing began 6 years ago, and I need you to feel the full circle of that. But this February is not negative 20 degrees, and I am not standing in a foyer handing anything to anyone who does not deserve it. I am standing at my new window at Meadowbrook Gardens, watching the winter light come in from the east side where the garden is. And the light in February is thin and precise and honest, and I find I like it. The cul-de-sac is still there. I drove past it last week. Not in a Lexus LS in champagne gold, not yet, but in the reliable car I bought myself in December. The first vehicle with my name alone on the title since I was 34 years old. I drove past the building with the long hallways and the fluorescent lights, and I looked at the window that used to be mine, and I felt what I had hoped I would feel. Nothing that required me to stay. Just the clean recognition of a chapter that is finished. Raymond and I finalized the divorce in January. There was no dramatic courtroom scene. There was a document and signatures, and it was done. He has moved on to whatever version of himself he maintains now, and I genuinely do not think about him most days. Not because I have achieved some perfect spiritual enlightenment. I want to be honest with you about that. It is simpler than that. He no longer takes up space in my daily architecture. When you remove the person who has been the center of every decision, every permission, every small negotiation of your own existence. There is a moment of disorientation, followed by an extraordinary amount of room. I am filling that room. Sister Dolores had dinner here at Meadowbrook 2 weeks ago, and we sat in the common room after the other residents had cleared out, and she said, "You look like yourself." I said I was still figuring out who that was. She said, "Lorraine, you have always known. You just let someone else talk over it." I think about that sentence often. It is the most accurate description of what gaslighting does. It is not that it changes who you are. It is that it talks over you, steadily and patiently, until you can no longer hear yourself. Now I want to speak to you directly, because this part of the story matters more to me than any of the drama that came before it. What happened to me has a name. Several names, in fact. Psychological manipulation, gaslighting, financial exploitation, elder financial abuse. These are not exotic crimes that happen to other people in other circumstances. They are systematic, patient, and specifically designed to target people who are trusting, who value relationships, who believe in keeping the peace. Gaslighting works by replacing your memory with the manipulator's version of events, by making you doubt your perception so consistently that you eventually stop using it. It begins small, almost imperceptibly, and by the time it is severe, the victim has already lost access to the internal compass that would tell them something is wrong. That is not weakness. That is what the technique is designed to produce. Financial exploitation of older adults is underreported because too many of us have been told, explicitly or implicitly, that we are too old to understand, too old to matter, too old to start again. I need you to know that medical studies indicate that social isolation increases the risk of death by 29%, and isolation is always the first tool a manipulator uses, cutting the victim off from the people who would reflect reality back to them. That is not coincidence. It is method. If you are someone who has been gradually separated from your friends, your church, your neighbors, your family, if the people who knew you before became difficult to reach, that is the pattern. Name it. And while we often think of physical harm as the most visible danger, statistics indicate that about 5% of seniors suffer physical abuse, but the numbers for psychological and financial abuse are far higher and far less reported, because so many of us have been told that we should endure, that we have too little time left for it to be worth the disruption, that leaving or speaking up is a kind of ingratitude for whatever was not taken from us. You are not too old to be helped. You are not too far gone to rebuild. $200 in a credit union account was the start of my financial life at 73. If someone tells you that the window for your independence has closed, they are telling you that because your independence is a threat to their arrangement. Believe the documents. Believe the woman in the mirror. Believe the neighbor who has been watching you shrink and waiting for you to be ready. Here is the one concrete thing I want to leave with you. If something in your financial life does not make sense, and the person who controls that information tells you the confusion is yours, do not let the explanation settle in your body without verification. Write down the date. Photograph the documents if you can do so safely. Find one person outside the relationship who can look at what you are looking at. You do not need to know what to do with the information yet. You just need to get it out of the room where it can be explained away. The sweet potato pie at Meadowbrook has become what I always hoped it would be. Last Saturday, we had 7 women in that kitchen, and one of them, a woman named Gloria, who is 80 and moved in 3 months ago, told me while we were mixing the filling that she had not cooked anything in 4 years, that her husband had told her she had forgotten how. She looked at the mixing bowl and said, "I don't think I forgot at all." I said, "No, you didn't. You were just told you did." She made the best pie of the group, dense and sweet and honest, exactly as it should be. Now I want to hear from you. Where are you listening from today? Are you in a city where the winters are long, or somewhere the heat settles in slow like a blanket? Are you listening from a place where you are safe? Or are you listening from a place where you recognize parts of what I just told you? I want to know. Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And tell me this. What would you have done, standing in that hallway with that folder, with 43 people on the other side of that door? What would you have said? If this story stayed with you, if it said something you needed to hear, or named something you have been trying to name, please share it with someone who might need it. Like this video, because it helps more people find their way to it when they are searching. And subscribe, because I will be back with more stories like this one. Stories about women who found their records, said no out loud, and meant it. One final thing. When the finances are fully rebuilt, and they will be, I am going to lease a Lexus LS in champagne gold and park it out front of Meadowbrook Gardens on a Saturday morning before pie class, not to perform anything, not to prove anything to Raymond or to anyone else, but because I have wanted that car for a long time, and I have earned the right to want things, and the woman in the mirror told me so.